Hey guys, it's Sarah from Sleepopolis, and if you're watching this video, it's because you want to know everything there is to know about the Brooklyn bedding weighted blanket. Well, you're in luck because I'm going to answer all your questions about what it's made of, how to use it, how to wash it, how much it costs, so stay tuned. So I've got the weighted blanket on the bed right now, but before I get into my first impressions of it, I just want to say, if throughout the course of this video any questions come up or you want a personal recommendation from me, don't hesitate to give me a shout in the comment section below. I'm always checking back and I'd be happy to help. All right, so first things first is they hit you right away with exactly how to care for this weighted blanket and also how to put it inside the duvet cover. They also give you a little bit of info about what makes it a dual therapy weighted blanket, which we'll talk about in a moment. But of course, my first impression is, wow, the duvet cover is super soft, but each side of the duvet cover has a different feel. On the one side, you've got this really warm and cozy feel, and the other side is this really cool and silky feel. So let's open it up, take a closer look at what exactly it's made of. All right, so first let's talk about the weighted insert of the blanket, which is tucked away inside the duvet cover. So the weighted portion of this blanket is covered in 100% polyester microfiber, feels really soft and a little bit fuzzy on the skin. Now it's filled with glass beads, which is what's giving this blanket its weight. And what I like about the weighted portion of this blanket is that it features gridded stitching, which keeps all of the glass beads locked away in their individual squares, which makes for a very even distribution of weight. Now we'll talk more about deep pressure touch in a moment, but when it comes to really reaping the benefits of deep pressure touch, you're going to want to make sure that that pressure is evenly distributed throughout the blanket. So I like that this one features gridded stitching. All right, so what makes this a dual therapy weighted blanket? Well, it's because it's got a cover fabric with a dual design. On the one side, you've got this minky material that is super warm and fuzzy on the skin. It's got this really ultra cozy factor. And then on the other side of the duvet cover is 100% Tencel, which I'll admit is my personal favorite side because number one, Tencel is known for its uniquely silky smooth feel, and it also feels very cooling on the skin. So if you're someone who kind of worries about getting too hot under a weighted blanket, take comfort in the fact that you sort of have the option to choose between a warm side and a cool side. Now, another thing I like about this duvet cover is, first of all, it's obviously removable, but it's also machine washable. And it features 12 internal ties, which I have to say is probably the most internal ties I've ever seen in a weighted blanket, which keeps the weighted portion of the blanket totally locked in place. Now, I will say that in my experience, it can get very frustrating because obviously the weighted portion of the blanket is very weighty. So if it's not tied with those internal loops, it can just sort of sink to the bottom of the blanket and you kind of got to wrangle with it. So definitely appreciate how many ties are in this duvet cover. Now, I've got the 15-pound blanket here. It does come in a 20-pound option as well. And if you need a little refresher about how to pick the weight that's right for you, just aim for the weighted blanket that's closest to 10% of your own body weight. So for example, if you're closest to 150 pounds, go with the 15-pound blanket. And if you want to know more about how to pick the weighted blanket that's best for you, just go to sleepopolis.com, type in best weighted blankets, it'll be the first thing that pops up, and I dive into all kinds of detail. But for now, let's go ahead and recap the highlights and potential pitfalls of this blanket so you can better decide if it's the best fit for you. So there's a lot that I'm liking about this weighted blanket. First of all, I love the dual-sided cover fabric. And it really lets you choose between this silky, smooth, and very cool to the touch Tencel side, or this minky dot material that has those really fuzzy dots and is very warm and cozy. But not to mention, the duvet cover is easily removable, it is machine washable, and the weighted portion of the blanket is covered in microfiber, which feels really uniquely warm and fuzzy on the skin. So essentially, you kind of have three different options as far as feel goes. Now, another thing that I'm liking about the weighted portion of this blanket is that it features the gridded stitching that really makes for a nice even distribution of weight. Now remember, sort of the whole purpose behind these sleep accessories is that they offer what's known as deep pressure touch, which makes you feel nice and sleepy and calm. And it works best when the pressure is evenly distributed throughout the blanket. And I feel like the gridded stitching does a great job of that. And speaking of which, I love that the removable duvet cover has 12 internal loops, because it really just makes sure that the weighted insert doesn't move. It's really not going anywhere. I will say that it does take a little bit of extra time to fasten all 12 loops, but it's definitely worth the effort because the last thing you want your weighted blanket to do is really shift around within the duvet cover itself. Now, of course, there are some things to consider about this weighted blanket before you make your purchase. So first of all, the wash care instructions. Now, I will say that I find it to be a little misleading because on the brand's website and on the tag of the weighted blanket, it says that the removable duvet cover is the only part that's machine washable. But here under proper care, it says that every component is machine washable. So in my experience with weighted blankets, it's generally the case that the cover is machine washable and dryable, and the weighted insert must be spot cleaned only. So I'm gonna go with spot cleaned only for this, but it's just worth noting that there is a little bit of misleading information going on surrounding the wash care. Now, another thing to consider are the weight options, of which there are only 2 with this blanket. 15 pounds and 20 pounds. Now, in my experience testing weighted blankets, there's usually 10 pound, 15 pound, 20, usually 25 pound options. So you really cover a wide weight range, but with this, it's really only gonna be suitable for those who are in the 150 to 200 pound range, which, like I said, is relatively small. And the last thing to consider, of course, is price. So depending on the weight you choose, this blanket ranges in price from $139 to $149, which of course isn't gonna be in everyone's budget, but it's also important to note that the 120-night trial period offered by Brooklyn Bedding only applies to its mattresses, not its sleep accessories. Now, you do get a 30-day return policy with this weighted blanket, but again, no trial period. Now, before we wrap up this review, I just want to address some questions that I get all the time about weighted blankets. First of all, do weighted blankets make you hot? Well, it really depends upon 2 things. First of all, your own body temperature. We all run at different temperatures. I am someone who runs hot year-round, and I will say that in my experience testing weighted blankets, a lot of the time they do make me feel pretty warm. But the other thing that it really depends upon is the materials used. And the Brooklyn Bedding weighted blanket is a great example of that. You've got the mink side, which is really warming and cozy, but then the tensile side, which is very cool, very soothing on the skin. So again, really depends upon your own body temperature, but also the materials used. Now, another question I get a lot is, what are weighted blankets filled with? Well, in my experience, almost every single weighted blanket I've ever tested has been either filled with glass beads or plastic pellets. And in the case of the Brooklyn Bedding, we know it's filled with glass beads, which I have to say is probably the most popular choice. However, there is one weighted blanket I've tested. It's called the Tree Napper, which is what you're looking at now, and it's not filled with plastic pellets or glass beads. It gets its weight from nothing but layer upon layer of tensile. So if you want to know more about the Tree Napper, definitely check out Sleepopolis.com. Just type in Tree Napper weighted blanket. It'll be the first thing that pops up. But it's good to know that there are weighted blankets out there that aren't filled exclusively with glass beads or plastic pellets. And lastly, and perhaps my favorite question to answer, is how long should you use a weighted blanket? Most people are under the impression that weighted blankets are meant to be slept under all night long for 8 hours at a time, but that's not the case, and in fact can actually lead to muscle fatigue or even desensitize you to the healing properties of deep pressure touch. So instead, you should use your weighted blanket for about 30 to 40 minutes at a time, taking breaks of 90 minutes in between. Well, that's it from me, but for every last detail on this weighted blanket, be sure to check out my full written review by going to Sleepopolis.com, type in Brooklyn Bedding weighted blanket, it'll be the first thing that pops up. And while you're there, if you want to know more about how this weighted blanket compares to others that I've tested, or more about deep pressure touch in general, just search for best weighted blankets. It'll be the first thing that pops up. And like I said, I dive into much deeper detail. Now, I hope you found this review to be helpful. And if you did, be sure to like and subscribe to our channel, follow us on social media. We're always uploading more content with one main thing in mind: to get you some better sleep. Well, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.